Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe, free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS show is all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. Our guest today is Robert Powell, CEO of Invictus Leadership Group. But first, let's cut the bullshit. The No BS show affords me the opportunity to hear from successful leaders like Robert from all walks of life. My company, Mass Solutions, provides me and my team the chance to help clients achieve their goals. These and other experiences have taught me that leaders, including myself, need to allocate more time to leading and less to managing. Or as I like to say, focus on the 5 key areas of activity and accountability agreement, which is an exercise we work on a lot with marketing leaders that are at our clients. One step of the 5 is planning, managing strategy. This one's neglected when we're pulled into the crisis of the day. Who can focus on vision when they think they need to fix a supposedly urgent problem? Leading, managing your team. How much time do you really spend on motivating each direct report? Motivating your entire team? How well are you communicating with peers? Another of the 5 is organizing, managing processes. Developing the how for yourself and each of your direct reports leads to processes for each major activity. Productivity goes up, and so does both employee and customer satisfaction. Another one, and probably the most neglected one, is development, managing self. It's about personal and professional growth, and unfortunately, too many of us put this off and rationalize that we were too busy to invest in our own development. And Robert, as an HR guru, is going to touch on that and all your career stuff. And the last one, administering, managing resources. Here's where the majority of time, unfortunately, is often spent, even if most leaders don't want to admit it. Budget management, vendor management, internal meetings, paperwork, HR stuff. When we're at our best as leaders, we focus the majority of our time on leading and planning while reducing our time administering and managing. If we invest in improving processes, we can buy ourselves and our teams time to focus on the bigger picture stuff. But we also need to commit to invest time into personal and professional growth. The No BS show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/NoBS. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Robert Powell is the Chief Executive Officer of Invictus Leadership Group. He's an accomplished human resources executive, over 25 years of experience in various industries that we're going to tap into today. He's been the top human resources executive with large organizations, including a global Fortune 500 company. So he knows what he's talking about, big time, small time, medium time companies. Robert's known for being a strategic thinker and change agent with expertise in change management, talent management, succession planning, executive development, workforce, and supplier diversity. He's also a Vistage chair with Vistage International, and you guys know I love Vistage because it's about that word, growth, personal and professional. It's a 60-year-old organization dedicated to guiding CEOs, small business owners, entrepreneurs, and key executives to become better leaders who make better decisions and achieve greater results. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to get into this because during our pre-show interview, we already started talking about career trajectory, career advice, human resources, leadership management. We're both passionate about personal and professional growth. Let's start by having you walk us through your educational background and your career journey.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. Well, from an academic standpoint, oddly enough, I was a bit unconventional. I actually started out my college days at Florida State. I was going to be a music education major. My goal was to be a high school band director. And interesting, aside from that, Walt Disney World was coming through auditioning for musicians, and on a dare from a friend of mine, I took that dare and auditioned and got the job at Disney, and he did not. So after started working with Disney as a musician, I moved down to Orlando, Florida, Walt Disney World, Orlando, and started playing as a musician there. And then transferred all my college hours down to the University of Central Florida.
What'd you play?
I'm a percussionist. Yeah, I
Nice.
play all percussion instruments. I tell people all the time I did everything from being a toy soldier in a Christmas parade to playing a set drummer at the castle show at Walt Disney World. And so when you're there, you have to be multifaceted. So I was fortunate to have that experience at Walt Disney World. And
Did you work there the whole time you were in college?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, that sounds about right. But it wasn't my first job. You know, we can probably talk about that later. You kind of get grounded in some things, right? But so I started attending University of Central Florida part-time while I was working full-time, and started working on my degree in organizational communications at University of Central Florida, and completed that degree. And while I was a musician, but before I finished it, I actually moved into human resources at Walt Disney World down there. Had a lot of great experiences working at that company. Did college recruiting, helped them a lot throughout their massive expansion of their hotels that they had back in the early 80s. When I started, for example, they had just a contemporary Fort Wilderness and a Polynesian hotel. Now they've got so many that I can't even keep up with them. Great place to work, great place to start your career. So I was very, very fortunate.
It's kind of that's an understatement. It's kind of a letdown anywhere else you go.
I wouldn't say that. I've had the pleasure of working for some pretty amazing companies in their own right, but starting out with Disney, I think got me started off on the right foot. So that was certainly pleasurable and learned a lot of
In
experiences.
a happy place. He started off in a happy
The happiest
place.
place on earth if
That's
you
right.
listen to Disney rhetoric.
Messaging.
Absolutely. So it was a great experience there. I worked there close to 12 years and actually moved into human resources and did a lot of great work there. Was involved a little bit with the Disney Institute when they were coming up through the ranks, and then got recruited from there to a company in Minneapolis called Carlson Companies. They own several different things. They used to own all of the TGI Fridays around, the Radisson Hotels, Radisson Seven Seas Cruise Lines, Carlson Wagonlit Travel, and et cetera. Fabulous organization.
What made you take that position?
Great question. The person who was my boss at Walt Disney World used to work for Carlson Companies, and he went back to Carlson Companies and allegedly was just visiting, but en route. He said, "Robert, I'm coming down. I'd love to have lunch with you." Little did I know he was a recruitment trip for him. So he actually recruited me to come work with him at Carlson Companies. So I left nice, warm Orlando, Florida to go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and culture change as well as temperature change, to say the least. I had the experience there of experiencing below zero temperatures for the first time in my life, and it was quite the experience. One day my car got so cold, I had a standard shift, that I couldn't get the gearbox to move, so it had to warm up for about 20 minutes before I could go anywhere. But that was quite the experience.
Man.
Loved working for Carlson Companies, great organization. Actually got my first vice president's job there, and I was the VP of HR for Carlson Wagonlit Travel of the Americas. So I had the pleasure of being in that position and coming up the ladder fairly quick. So I was fortunate, had great support there, did a lot of great things while I was with that organization. From there, went and joined a company called AT&T. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that place, but I was in the Southeast market working out of Atlanta. So another relocation move for me. But part of my whole goal was to continue to move up the ladder and it fit into my destination. So after working with AT&T for a while.
Well, what position did you take with
I was the VP of HR for the Atlanta market, and so some of the greater metro Atlanta area. It was a large market, if you can imagine. AT&T was.
So you go hot, cold, hot.
Hot, cold, hot. That's exactly right. Then I got recruited to a company in Decatur, Illinois called Archer Daniels Midland ADM. Great organization. So you're not familiar with ADM a lot. I find people really are not familiar with ADM, but they are an ingredients company. They make a ton of ingredients for just about anything that you may eat. They have some sort of ingredient or some industrial uses. Even some of the toothpaste that you have, you will have some ingredient that comes from ADM. They are probably known, I'd say, in a wider sector for citric acid. You may have heard about that. They've come under fire for high fructose corn syrup, but sometimes that could be a little bit hype. And then also ethanol. They're big producers of ethanol. And I just picked those three because those are things that most consumers can grab onto and are familiar with. Other things, they have just, it's said that about maybe 35% of all the ingredients come from ADM. And it's unbelievable the things they do. They're everything from cocoa, wheat, soybeans, any sort of raw material. They get a lot of their materials they get from corn. The ingredients they make from corn, such as high fructose corn syrup and citric acid. So it's a fabulous company. Very, very progressive now. So I was very, very fortunate to work with them.
How long were you with them?
6 years. Yeah, I was with them for 6 years. So very fortunate to have had that opportunity. And they brought me to the wonderful world of the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers, is a company here in town called Westco Distribution. So I was brought in as the head of HR for Westco Distribution. And that's what got me here to wonderful world of Pittsburgh.
It's an impressive, I have to take that statement back when I told him he started, and it was, only downhill from Disney, because these are amazing companies. So you have Disney, Carlson Companies, AT&T, ADM, and Westco. Yeah. Let's talk about Westco real quick. How long were you there?
I was with Westco for, 97, I want to say just about 4 years.
So when I look at this, it's such a great mixture of background, because you had the time at Disney where you started off at on the creative talent side, and you did almost probably so much stuff, so much operations and HR. You go to Carlson, and at each place, even though they're huge, you're like, when you said you're VP in the Atlanta division, so you're at AT&T, but you're still able to manage a business unit. And so it's kind of like getting the best of both worlds. You're with a Fortune 500 size company, plus you're still managing a business practice. So you're like the CEO of that particular.
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate that where I've been able to work at very large companies, some nice small organizations, be the head of HR for a division. So I feel like throughout my career, I've had a plethora of experience that really kind of set me up to do what I do today. And I didn't neglect one thing. I was very, very fortunate that while I was with ADM, they supported me and sponsored me so that I can get my MBA. So I got my MBA from Illinois State University while I was with there, thanks to Archie Daniels Midland.
The No BS Marketing Podcast with Dave Mastovich is brought to you by Mass Solutions. Put our 3-step No BS process to work for you. Visit masssolutions.biz today to take your marketing to another level. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.
So talk a little bit about that. Each stop, there was probably, and maybe if you can name a couple of mentors other than your parents.
Easy. There's two people that come to mind. I mentioned earlier that when I left Disney, the VP who was there that went to Carlson Companies, a gentleman by the name of Doug Zemer. Doug was one of my favorite bosses that I've ever worked with. And I would say not because of the fact that he was, super, super nice guy, but he was fair. When I did good things, he patted me on the back heartily. And when I didn't do some things not so great, he gave me a harder pat on the back, I guess you could say. But the thing that I think that made him such a great boss was that he instilled in me the confidence to go for it and that he would have my back. And that was very, very important. It was a good fit for my personality because I kind of like charting my path, setting the direction, and having that support system there with Doug was just great. I still talk to him every now and then just to see how he's doing. I know his family, know his wife, he knows mine, and I think that's just great. And I still hold him in high regard because of that to this day.
So, and mentors become a part of your life. That's what I talk about.
Absolutely. I think that, he was a great mentor to me, and how we started our relationship is actually a funny story going back to Disney. One year they had asked me to play Santa Claus. It was being Disney for our office holiday party and et cetera. And I politely refused. And so everyone was shocked because I was usually very, I guess you could say, friendly and easy to kind of get along with. And I still am for the most part. But I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. So he brought me in one day and he said, so Robert, I heard about this. Well, what's going on? Why don't you want to play Santa Claus? I said, well, we have these things at Disney, and actually it's a law out there called BFOQ, which is called Bona Fide Occupational Qualification. And so, for example, like if you look at Snow White, well, Snow White is depicted as a white female with certain type of hair color because of the cartoons. And I said, when you think about Santa Claus, basically it's a fat white guy, and that's just not who I am. So I don't want to play Santa Claus. And he looked at me, he starts laughing, and he goes, I get that, totally get it, and understand your reasoning. And so ever since we had that conversation, he and I have always gotten along well. And in fact, when he was recruiting me to come to Carlson Companies. He said, one of the reasons I wanted you to come and work here is because I know you're a straight shooter and you'll be respectful. You'll tell people what you think about things. And he said, that's the type of folks I want to have on my team. And I know that I can trust you to just tell me what you think without having to have any sort of bars or any sort of blockage or anything like that. So that was it. And then the other person I have to give credit to is a lady who was my boss when I was at ADM. Her name was Maureen Assura. And Maureen was great. I mean, I just really, really enjoyed her. She gave me the freedom to do what I needed to do. I would always prepare my plan of what I plan to do, put it in front of her. She would give her input and she'd say, go forth and conquer. And I would go and do that. So I've always admired those individuals who were supportive as well as being honest with me about, okay, this looks good. That looks crappy. Let's rework it, but in a very respectful type of manner. And I could do that. So those are two people that stick out in my mind, of course. And, from a personal standpoint, I have to kind of always think about my grandmother and my dad. And my grandmother was one of very simple wisdom. And she taught me a very big lesson as I was growing up. And she brought me down and sat me down one day and she said, Robert, you're kind of the brains of the family. She said, but you know what? You're going to screw up your life if you don't learn this one thing. And, being the brash 15-year-old that I was at the time, I was like, all right, what is it, girl? And she goes, if you don't learn to kind of hold your tongue, think twice and speak once, you are not going to get anywhere in this world. And so that always stuck with me. And I found that throughout my career that saved my bacon more times than I could probably count. But it was just one of those things that you learn, simple wisdom that carries you through life. And my dad, he was a New York City fireman. And I'll never forget, I was 9 years old and I was working on this math problem. It could have been fractions or something, which I still have problems with to this day, but on fractions. And I was getting frustrated and I was really getting upset. And he walks in and he goes, what's wrong? And I said, well, I can't get this done, Dad. And he looks at me and he goes, well, come here. And he sits me down and he goes, there's two things I want you to do. And I'm like, oh God, here's Dad. He's about to get on me, right? He goes, first of all, I want you to eradicate the word can't from your vocabulary. I never want to hear you say that again, ever. Because you can do anything in this world you decide to do. And he said, second thing I want you to do is go get a sandwich or something, watch TV for about an hour, and then come back to the problem. So I did that. And I sat down and within literally about 20 seconds, I had it all worked out and et cetera. And I was all excited and geeked up and went back and I said, hey, I got it done, Dad. I was able to get it. He goes, I knew you could. The problem is that you allowed yourself to get so frustrated that you had a block. And he said, you just needed the break. So the learning there for me, he said, sometimes, son, you just got to step away from things for a minute to be able to kind of push through it.
Yeah.
And so that was two important things. So I had some great work mentors coming up through the line. And then from a personal standpoint, those two things from my dad and grandmother always stick out with me and carry me to this day.
And he remembers them.
Yeah. So I've shared them with my kids and they know them well and they know the story.
That's Robert Powell. He's our guest on the No BS Marketing Show. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. So you've given us, this show's all about leadership, communication, growth. So you've given us a couple of great examples of mentors in personal life and professional life. You walked through major steps with large companies and successes. Let's look at the other side. What did you see where there was a time when you saw some BS in the workplace where something was a little bit crazy?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, coming up through the corporate ladder, you have the opportunity to see a lot of it. You sometimes smell a lot of it, just putting in your terms. But I would say, there was this one particular position that I had taken that where I was hired to be the VP of HR. And the individual who was there prior had been there for quite some time, I think maybe 10 years or 11, and was leading the HR practice. For whatever reasons, the senior management, chairman and CEO, and all the other senior execs felt they needed someone of higher caliber. So they hired me. They did not terminate the other individual. They said, it's up to you, whatever you want to do, but he's been here for a while. See how it works. That was fine. So after being there for a little bit, I just began to see little things where he was undercutting me. Okay. And it got to be a little bit overt. And, so I ended up having to sit down with this individual and said, look, I'm trying to work this thing out. I realize it's an uncomfortable spot for you, but it wasn't my decision to do this to you, and I'm feeling like you're taking it out on me. So let's try to make sure we reset the dial and make sure we understand what my expectations are and how you can play a role here. And if you're okay with that, we can move forward. If not, we'll have to talk about it. So I gave it another few months, but ultimately we ended up having to part ways. And I could certainly understand how that would feel if I was in that person's position. But to me, that was total BS. And just the recognition that don't take it out on me, take it out on someone else. And I've experienced that before. In the same situation where someone, I was getting promoted to the VP of HR role. Someone in another division felt like that should have been their job. And that person was acting really odd towards me. So I had to have a similar conversation. So, the learning for me is that I certainly understand that people can be in those situations and they happen for whatever reason, but you shouldn't take it out on the person who was selected. They were just going for the job. That was it.
I've lived that as pretty much a turnaround guy throughout my career to turn around the growth of divisions or even turn around the sales, PR, marketing, communications, advertising, branding, all of that stuff. You come into these departments and there was a person, like you said, when you come in and the person's still there, it's such a tough thing because if you come in as a leader and say, I want to try to salvage everyone here, I want everyone to have personal, professional growth, and then you see some of the people are immediately shooting at you from the grassy knoll,
right?
And then others, others suck it up. But I will say, multiple stops, there were people that when I came in, the CEO said, this person might not be able to stay. They might resent you. And I had a few that turned out to be superstars on my team that kept. And there were a few I had to do the same talk that you had.
That's right.
And it ties back to my rant. It's all about when we go in and work with companies, which what makes Mass Solutions a little bit different. And you've helped a lot with giving us your perspective on Mass Solutions. And I've spoke to your Vistage group.
Sure.
Is that the rant was about the activity and accountability agreement process that we use. And that's key because it's about going over the activities and the accountabilities, having that person help build them, which is the agreement part.
Right. That's right.
When you get them to build them with you and agree on it, you can then lead to that. And you have these buckets of activities and you say, well, look, 60% of your time is on administering.
Right.
How can you possibly be doing self-development, leading your team, organizing and planning? And that's a lot of what we have to do at Mass Solutions as part of our services. And that's what makes us different.
Yep.
We're not just going out and creating an advertisement or helping with social media. It's this infrastructure of marketing leadership, which I know we're both passionate about leadership.
Absolutely,
so I just thought I'd jump in on that. I'm going to push the other way though. Now, when's an example when maybe you had a learning experience, a teachable moment? Not so much that you were a BSer, but that's kind of how we lump it just because of the name of the show. Looking back, where's a learning experience that can help our audience?
Yeah, there's something that definitely kind of comes to mind. It was, before I received my first vice president's job, I was, a peer. I had other peers. And I remember one particular peer who was a director, same level as mine, said, Robert, you're going to be the next VP of HR. For some reason, they could see the tea leaves. I didn't see the tea leaves. I was just keeping my head down, just doing what I needed to do to get the job done. Certainly didn't, I guess, maybe understand the political landscape as well as I should have. But what she told me, she says, when you do get promoted, don't change. We still want you to hang out with us, be just still the great guy that you were, and et cetera. And I said, well, if something like that happens, sure, no problem. I like you guys. We get along well. I don't see any reason why I would change. Well, lo and behold, I do get promoted. I'm surprised. I mean, literally, I was surprised because there was an announcement that came out that I had been promoted to the VP of HR, but no one had talked to me about it yet. That was an interesting aside about a failure in communication in a big way. Yes. So imagine trying to negotiate your salary from that position when it's already been announced, right? But I digress. So what happened at about maybe the 3 to 4 month time frame, I began to notice those individuals who were my peers began to treat me different, even though I was behaving the same way. So after experiencing this for a while, I asked that same person who's in advice, I said, everybody's seeming a little odd towards me. Am I doing something wrong, or what's going on here? I'm trying to be the same person. She says, well, you've got the title now. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, you're now the VP. And though it was an innocent comment, it took a little bit of time for me to really fully understand that, when you get to that level, there's a certain level of expectations that you may not be aware of. I wasn't aware of it. I was taking the advice of the team. I've always been a team player, but I learned that there's certain disease out there. And that disease is something called titleitis.
Titleitis.
Yeah, I like it. Titleitis.
Titleitis. And something I coined. So if you decide to use it from a marketing standpoint, I want my cut. So let's just be real clear about that. You heard it here first on the podcast.
It'll be on the show notes.
All right, just be clear about that. So, what I learned from that is when you get to a certain level, there's expectations. People treat you different. And that concept of lonely at the top starts becoming a reality, because you find out that people who were your peers before, even though you have a different set of peers, they all have similar levels of responsibility, and they all have a tendency to want to kind of protect themselves a little bit more. So you're only, from a political standpoint, you only share so much. So I began to feel, really that concept of being lonely. Who do you really get to go talk to? You can't really necessarily talk to your boss about everything, because he or she is the one that's evaluating you for your pay increases, stock increases, and bonuses. So you always want to show yourself in the best light. You got your peers.
Oh, you don't want to talk to them. I learned that the hard way.
You got your peers, because they're always looking for ammo to kind of shoot at you.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got the people below you that you're trying to lead. So that it starts becoming very, very lonely. And it's, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but it's one of the things that I'm very proud of from a Vistage standpoint.
I agree. Just about to say,
that's what where
I get the Vistage standpoint is I lost that ability to be able to talk to people, having a boss. And also, while I joked about the peers, you have to find some peers you can trust. Well, here you kind of lose both of those. So I have my Vistage chair, but I also have other Vistage chairs, which you become helpful with as well, because I have Chuck and Harris, who's a great chair. But then there's times where I run into you and I just feel like I can also trust you.
Sure.
And it's a huge, huge value.
Yep, absolutely. And at that time, I didn't have that at all. And even though you may have a good spouse, or you may have some best friends, they aren't necessarily in the same environment with you, or they can't relate to the level of challenges.
I would say I would take your titleitis a step further. What I found, people that care deeply about you and love you still struggle with your titleitis.
Yeah.
I had friends growing up, because I went up very fast through the ranks like you, and so friends would struggle with it. I mean, it was an awkward thing where you'd have friends who weren't going quite up the ladder. And so then there was some unintentional resentment. It was just weird.
Right. That's exactly right. I think what happens is people kind of forget that you're human.
Exactly.
And that you still need that interaction. You still need to have those trusting relationships. But unfortunately, in the corporate world, and just like any sort of other politics, given the political nature where we are today, and just in the government, you always have people who are doing some mudslinging for right, wrong, or indifferent for their own gains. And I always kind of look at it from a giant crab pot. If you get on top of the pot, you got everyone else trying to pull you down, right? And it seems a little bit fatalistic, but everyone has their own agenda. And it's one of those things that if you have a group of people around you, like a Vistage group, you don't have to worry about an agenda, because everybody's there just to genuinely help each other. So for me, it was a big, big learning that concept of lonely at the top is a very real thing.
And titleitis. That's Robert Powell, CEO of Invictus and a Vistage chair. Hear more of my interview with Robert on part 2